Hey everyone, welcome to this MatchPal webinar on the Residency personal statement. We're going to cover how program directors actually read and evaluate your statement, how to structure a successful personal statement, and go through feedback on several live examples. We hope you enjoy.
And with me, like I said, I have an awesome panel. So maybe we'll start off with Romaine if you want to tell us a little bit about you, where you're from, and little fun fact maybe.
Sure. My name's Roman. I go to UT San Antonio. I'm originally from Phoenix. My parents are both French. A little fun fact about me is I'm a pilot.
Amazing, amazing. And you're PGY2, right? So CA1
Correct.
anesthesia.
Yep. Yep.
Amazing. All right, very popular specialty. I know we have a lot of anesthesia applicants on the call, so that's amazing. All right, Katerina.
Cool. Hi. I'm Katerina. I'm a third year, I guess PGY3 technically speaking. I'm on my 2 years of research fellowship at Indiana University, taking some time off. Been in New York all my life. Literally working or worked 10 minutes out from where I grew up. I guess fun fact is I used to be an ice skater. So yeah.
Love that. Awesome. All right, so we have some surgical representation, which is always very important. And I know we have a lot of ACOS members on the call too. So we're definitely going to dive into surgery specific tactics and strategies as well, because I know that actually can differ quite a bit for the personal statement. And we also have Joe Goffman.
Hey everyone, I'm Joe, PGY2 dermatology resident up in the Bronx, born and raised in Brooklyn. Just got back from a 5-year stint in Miami where I did med school and my intern year with the University of Miami. Fun fact about me, also an athlete. I used to play Division 1 Quidditch, so look out.
I love that. And also we have one of the original MatchPal co-founders. Also, we have Ian. Ian, if you want to just do a quick intro as well.
Hey everyone, I'm Ian. I'm a diagnostic radiology resident in Wisconsin, PGY4 now. Feels kind of weird to say. Going to be working behind the scenes with some of the tech support tonight, but nice to be speaking with all of you.
Awesome. All right, so we're going to jump right in because we got a lot to cover. So I think the most important thing that I want every med student in this room to remember is that the statements that you've written in the past are very different than the statement that you're about to write, right? Probably most of you have written a personal statement for medical school, right? That was probably the last time you thought about who you were as a person, why you're here, why are you pursuing this career, why do you want to do this, and kind of like putting all that into writing. And a lot has changed since then. And not only has a lot changed about you, but a lot has also changed about what you are writing and applying for, right? For many students, this is the first time you're applying for a job. And I think that's the number one framework I really want you guys to think about is that unlike academic essays where you're writing for a scholarship or for a school, degree position, this is the first time that you're probably writing a whole page on why you're going to be a good employee, in addition to convincing them why you chose a specific field. And so I want that framework to really stick in your head as we go through the rest of the content today, the edits that we do as well. And as you read your own personal statement, right after this call, hopefully with all the takeaways that we give you, because that lens is the lens that the program director and the faculty are looking at, and us as well when we evaluate people for our programs, in addition to the students that we help through MatchPal. So, we're looking at someone who's going to demonstrate the specialty kind of understanding without telling me exactly what my job is, and really through like what kind of experiences led them to making this choice of choosing this field, but also someone who's demonstrating through their application and statement that they're going to be an excellent coworker, they're going to be dependable, honest, and all the other characteristics that make a good resident, right? So just keep that in mind. And I don't know if anyone else from the panel has any specific kind of contrasting ideas to talk about or mention that students, like if you're staring at a blank page and you're like, I don't even know where to start or what to include other than maybe the 4 bullets on the screen here. Is there anything else that students should be thinking about when they're just like, all right, where do I start? Like, where do I start with like, what do I write about?
I think one of the things that really helped me, Daniel, was it's kind of hard to figure out something to first start writing about. What I did was I took a blank piece of paper and I started writing every little thing I liked about anesthesia, as mundane or as silly as it sounded, whether it was just placing an IV, pre-oping a patient, whatever it was, I just wrote it down on a piece of paper and at least I started making a list like that. And then I would expand on those lists by describing exactly what I liked about it. And then from there, I just pick the top three and I use those to be kind of the big bulk of my personal statement.
I think that's great. I think kind of putting a mind map together of like lists or concepts or anything that you find to be valuable as part of this career. And then I think a similar one that you can write, right next to it, which is like, what are the things that make me me that like maybe someone else with the same scores and the same amount of research doesn't have, right? Like, what's the actual pitch here of like, why am I going to be better and different? I think similarly, writing all that out. And then once you have that map, I think you're in a much better place. You're certainly going to feel a lot more comfortable because you're going to be like, okay, now I probably have too much stuff to write about. So now it's like, which parts of these things are actually the things that are worth including, right? That other people are not going to include. Cool. I love that. I think this is the other thing. I kind of alluded to this earlier. I always, it's a very different perspective that I have now being 5 years into this, having served 5 rounds in my program and just doing this for so long. You have to really understand who your reader is, right? I think a lot of the time we're kind of writing a statement as a med student for like what sounds good to us, but you got to really think about like who's the other person reading this, right? The average time that people spend reading these is shockingly low for the amount of effort that goes into it. And that doesn't mean that you don't take it seriously. It means that it's actually that much more important that the statement is memorable and impactful because people are not going to be sitting there and, like dissecting every line in the same amount of detail that you are writing every line, right? And then I think the other shocking thing is that, 3/4 of program directors in the PD survey that the AMC does every single year, they say they use it for interview selection, which means that, this is a very, very high ranking tool in addition to board scores and research items that people are using to actually pick people, right? Because again, especially when you go to the more competitive fields, like, I know we have a lot of surgery people, a lot of derm people, anesthesia people. Oh, there's a lot of people who have 260s. There's a lot of people who have numerous publications in these specialties. And so your story becomes a major differentiator for the people that are trying to figure out how do I choose which of these amazing applicants to actually invite to this interview day, because they can only interview so many people. You guys have any insights that you guys want to share from either your experience, from your interview process, or from your programs? Anything about like how statements are analyzed, processed, and used in the process in this whole like application season?
I think something I come across a lot with students I work with is just remember this is an extension of your ERAS, but it's not a summary. I see so many students who just kind of copy and paste things from their 10 most meaningful from their resume. Like, we know that. Don't waste you have such precious little space. Don't waste energy writing, copying and pasting stuff that's elsewhere in the application. This is about you. Like, I want to read your personal statement and get a better understanding of who you are as a person. This is really your one place to give us an insight. So don't squander it.
Yeah, and I just want to piggyback on a little bit of what Joseph was saying. The personal statement should be like a complement to the 10 experiences that you're citing that are, reasons why you fit the specialty. But they also want to be able to, like, I guess just also going back to the point on the first paragraph doesn't hook. Like, surgeons don't really have a lot of time to read things. They're a lot of time spending, dedicating time in between cases, or they have other administrative tasks. So you really want to give that image of who you are and how you fit their team. And, if you, in that impression and within those 90 sections is really critical.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah. Especially if you really, once you're like, if any of you guys are on sub-Is or once you're residents, you'll actually see how this whole machine works from like the PD's lens. And you'll see that like, this is really genuinely being done like in between consults, in between cases, 30 minutes before you do your morning rounds. They're kind of like trying to crank a few of these out. And a lot of the times, some of them are being read right before the interview, like a quick skim over just to kind of get a refresh, right? They want to, you want to give them things in this document that's not found elsewhere in the application. I totally agree. All right. So this is kind of the anatomic breakdown, right? If we had to kind of deconstruct it, you want to have a compelling hook that makes me want to keep reading, right? And this is like this is not just your first sentence. This is your whole first kind of paragraph, right? Something that is actually makes me curious to learn more about who you are, right? I think one of the worst things that people do is start off with like, a patient encounter in the present. To me, that's like a very big turnoff as like an intro. There's many other ones that are not good. But either way, the hook is probably the most important thing. The middle really should be focusing on why the specialty and then why you, right? So what experiences led you to making this decision, how you got here, and how that molded you to be a better resident. And then I think at the end, where a lot of people drop the ball most commonly is not tying the story together and bringing me back into like a cohesive, like, okay, like that's why they mentioned this story in the beginning, or that's why they mentioned all this stuff in here. Like you're not giving me that like snapshot, right? The end should really be that really powerful snapshot. And then the statement really should be one page, right? Very rarely is there like a real reason for you to exceed a page. And I know people are like, oh, well, what if I have like a red flag, or what if I have like some other thing that I have to write about? I mean, there's especially now there's all these other components to the ERAS application that allow you to write about many other things, right? Taking a year off or impactful experiences section. There's places for this stuff, right? Keep the statement to one page. Don't break the rule. Again, very, very few people have a real reason to do so. So just keep all of this in mind as well, because this kind of stuff matters more. Not more, but it matters just as much as the actual content that you're writing. It's just understanding like how they're expecting you to write. And I think the hook, we can't talk about the hook enough, and we're going to talk about it in every single one of the edits that we do live in just a few minutes. But I think the second you start off with something that is not interesting to the reader, and again, to the reader, I emphasize that, because what you might find interesting, like a family member struggling with an illness, like that might genuinely have been a very impactful moment for you. But if you start off with that, and you're talking to a doctor who deals with people struggling through illnesses numerous times a day, every day, you kind of lose the opportunity to wow them or to make them interested, because this is our jobs. And so even though it's like a very emotional moment for you, it is unfortunately, we all have people that we know that deal with illnesses, right? It's not the best way to start it. And I think a lot of people like lean on this, especially in their rough drafts. It's like, this is how I want to start it. We encourage you to really try to think outside of the box while staying obviously professional and obviously, within good writing practices, that you are not bombing your first impression. Because for the hook, that an intro paragraph is your first impression. Any other kind of tips that people have for specifically either constructing or revising a hook? I know we're going to do this for the statements that we picked, but if, again, think about blank page person, like any ideas or any things that you've seen recently from your students that maybe like stood out to you?
I think something I come across a lot is kind of like a failed hook. That first sentence is just like people put so much thought into getting it right that it never reads well. Like I've edited dozens of statements now, and I can tell you more often than not, I end up just deleting the first sentence and leaving the second sentence, which was sort of an afterthought, as a first sentence, because it's so much more interesting. It just like it jumps in. I think starting in narrative, kind of unexpectedly, throwing you into the action, gives
Yeah.
it makes you want to keep reading.
Right. Right. Yeah. And you got to just think about any interesting book or article that you've read, right? Like, how did those start? They're starting off with like maybe like a verb, like the sound in a room, or the smell of something, or how something looked to you, right? Like paint the picture, like really put the reader in the room where whatever moment you're trying to share, it doesn't have to be clinical, by the way. It doesn't, and actually the statement in general, some of the best statements I've read have been largely not focused on clinical things, rather drawing parallels between medicine or their specialty and other interests or other activities that they participate in. Those have actually been some of the most powerful statements I've ever read. So keep that in mind too. The statement does not need to be all about like, I saw this patient and it inspired me, or I saw my relative go through this and it, because of that, I was so compelled to be a skin doctor. Sorry, Joe. All right. Quickly, I just want to talk a little bit. I mentioned this earlier, red flags, right? So red flags, some of them can go into the statement, some of them do not need to go into the statement, right? Just, you guys can take a screenshot of this, put this in your back pocket if it applies to you. We get a lot of questions on this every year, so we wanted to make sure it's covered. But in general, again, nowadays, ERS has like a lot of sections for students to write about red flags. So we don't need to necessarily always be like dissecting all of it. If you are going to do it, one paragraph maximum, ideally even less. And the focus is the come up. Okay. Just remember that. If this applies to you, the focus is always the come up, not the actual thing that happened to you. And then a couple of other Q&As that we always get. So when you're thinking about your statement, you might thinking about, if you're dual applying, right? Or maybe if you're applying to something like radiology or anesthesia and you need to apply to a preliminary program, should my statement change, right? So if you're dual applying, you always need two separate statements completely. You also need two separate letters of rec. If you're only applying to one specialty, I did not change my statement really. I don't think I changed it at all for like the TY prelim programs. So that's something to keep in mind too. Some people might tell you maybe switch you could always like switch the last line or two and say, hey, like I know this year is like fundamental to my training in X specialty. And this is why I value it, right? Kind of just acknowledging that this is a different, a slightly different reader. But I think those are two questions that we get a lot out of, right? The other question, and I'm actually curious to hear, these are my thoughts on the slide here, but I'm curious to get the panel's idea of like tailoring the personal statement. What do you guys think about that? Especially now that maybe people are applying to fewer programs in the era of signal tokens. What do you think about tailoring personal statements to specific programs?
So I know for places where I did sub-Is, I was absolutely sure to edit my statement, mention, kind of just save the space in the conclusion, name drop, maybe less not relying on that, but to say, I remember this encounter. I remember working with this attending, with this resident. I had this really meaningful experience. If it's a geographic area, I went to med school here. I lived here for years. I love it. I'm familiar with the environment, with the patient population. Where I grew up here, I think it's really valuable in certain instances. Like if you really have a connection to a geographic area, a program, and attending, it's definitely worth mentioning for I think more competitive specialties.
Yeah, I wouldn't go out of your way to reword your entire personal statement just to tailor it though. If you have like a generic, like not really necessarily generic, but like Joseph mentioned, like the patient population that can be applicable to some programs that you're more interested in, like programs, plural, like that could be something that you could consider to sort of elaborate on in your personal statement a bit more.
I think it's important too to remember that now I know that we're talking about sending in less applications because of the signaling stuff, but remember that signaling also comes with geographical signaling. So, you don't necessarily have to, if you're gonna, apply to a bunch of places in, California, you don't necessarily need to say why you love California so much, unless, like Joseph said, you have a really strong tie to a school or, all your family lives there or something like that. Then at that point it might be worth mentioning, but a kind of a more generic or not generic, but just a one type of personal statement is just as good.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
speaking with people from my program, this used to be a sort of novel thing a few years ago. Like I think maybe like 3 or 4 years ago, people really started doing this a lot more, and the novelty is kind of worn off. So, like Joe said, unless you have a strong connection that's actually going to move the needle in that paragraph, just changing the name of the program in your last paragraph, not advisable. It doesn't do anything, and it's just honestly a waste of your time because it's not like a sort of novelty that will impress the program director in today's application environment.
Yeah, and I think something worth mentioning is also if you are going to be customizing your personal statements, don't overdo it. I've seen a lot of people who are like really eager to jump out and say, that's why your program is my number one choice overall, and I'll do anything to get in. Like that can be overly aggressive. I've talked to a lot of program directors, and they really don't like it. Keep it professional, but keep it a little bit reeled in if you are going to be personalizing it.
Yeah, I agree. I think, having rotated at a place is a very compelling reason to personalize it based on the actual experiences that you've had. I think beyond that, the return on investment and also on like the impact on how you are potentially perceived drops significantly. So I think, it becomes like very much like not worth it. Um, okay, and then we have a couple of updates that are really important. And, maybe Roman can talk to us about anesthesia specifically, but basically three specialties now are requiring basically specialty specific questions. They're not in the personal statement itself, but these are additional essays that you have to write. So you have anesthesia, neurosurgery, and plastics. Any thoughts on that? Specifically on like what people should be thinking about, and how does that change the strategy maybe of writing the main personal statement now that these questions exist in parallel to it?
Yeah. I get this question like for the last year and 2 years now. I've been getting this question because this was a recent addition. Initially, there was like a completely different application set or like an application environment for anesthesia that we had to like dual apply through, and then they got rid of it. And that essentially came over from there. I don't think it necessarily changes what your personal statement should look like. The three questions, if I remember correctly, one of them was about like a time you faced diversity or adversity. And then I think something else was making a different decision if you had to do it again, and then describing your ideal life as an attending. I don't think that it has to change your personal statement. I just think it's another way for you to be able to describe who you are as an individual. I think a lot of the answers that programs are looking for from that are, I don't necessarily think programs look at that as intently as they do for personal statements. I think it's more so just a way for you to be able to describe yourself a little bit better if your personal statement was good to the point where a program's like, you know what, I'm going to read a little bit more about this guy and get a better sense of who they are.
Love it. I think, yeah, I think that's actually super helpful because the process changes every year. And like, yeah, like signal tokens weren't a thing, right? So now it's like, signal token and geographic signaling impacts trickle down, on the statement and ERAS experiences, right? Now these updates become also important to consider, and just understanding how to navigate it all is very important to just be on top of, especially if it applies, which it does to everyone on this call. All right. And I think it's time. I think it's time to go into some live edits. So what we're going to do is we're going to pivot in just a second, and we're going to go and pull up statements that we selected to discuss with all of you from the people that actually applied to register for this webinar, which is awesome. So the way we're going to do this, we're going to give everyone basically, 20 seconds, read the intro, and then we're going to just go round robin and talk about what we liked, what we didn't like. We're starting off with an anesthesiology personal statement. So everyone take a moment. Hopefully you guys see it all on the screen. And our panelists are going to kind of start chatting about it in just a second. All right, so when we're looking at the intro, anyone want to get us started on strengths, weaknesses? What are kind of some impressions that we're getting?
Yeah, so I think off the rip, if we're looking at just the first sentence, this is something we kind of talked about. It's a bit too on the nose exposition wise. I think an effective hook would really use narrative to paint a more vivid picture. And you're really trying to hook the audience into reading more. So make me feel this moment. Don't just say it. I think some of the most frustrating feedback we get when editing personal statements, to get into med school for residency, is show, don't tell. And this is a classic example of where telling doesn't get us excited enough about the essay to come. Once you break through that wall, it really radically transforms the personal statement. If you can get that powerful hook, if you can get us reeled in with a strong narrative off the jump, it makes us want to keep reading.
I totally agree. And I, by the way, I don't think that this is a bad hook, right? I think this is actually, it's interesting. Like not many people are, let's say, a first generation immigrant from another country, right? And my family is, so I personally do resonate with that. So to me, that's, it's not a bad hook. I mean, we can probably, depending on like conversations with the applicant and what the rest of their kind of story is, can probably maybe spin this up in a little bit more of an interesting way and putting me in the room, maybe when that like actual moment, what was the moment that made this person decide to leave and go to the United States? What inspired them? I think that could be more interesting, but I totally agree. All right. So what's next? So we got that first line. We're going to kind of switch it up a little bit. What's next?
I think one thing to kind of go off of for this paragraph specifically is how that pivotal moment of like having to move ties into their desire to pursue medicine, to pursue anesthesia. Because just in reading the rest of the paragraph, like it kind of you're kind of hinging on that very, very small detail that you're trusting discipline, commitment, and planning to be able to tie into these physician attributes. Like, sorry about that. I didn't really feel like reading the rest of the paragraph that it shouted at me that I wanted to take this patient, I'm sorry, not a patient, to take this applicant into the anesthesia program until the applicant mentioned the anesthesiologist. And even so, continuing downwards in that paragraph, that characteristic of they must master procedural competence in human physiology, da da da, it still didn't really feel specific to anesthesia quite yet. So I know that they're trying to build in this immigrant experience. I didn't really feel like it was tying into the desire to medicine as quite yet. So for me, I would be like, well, okay, I understand these two experiences are important, but how are they connecting?
Correct. And I also think that introducing the specialty is it's a little early and a little bit unnecessary, right? You have such a powerful story to tell about your background. This is like what a lot of students do in their statement is they don't keep a chronological timeline. And you're taking me, you know, don't take me out of the moment, right? Don't take me from 15-year-old you to current you and then back to 15-year-old you either, right? Keep it one continuous storyline. You can allude to the future, you can allude to how this molded you, but you do not want to kind of lose my focus, right? Again, thinking that how much time I'm going to be spending on this, do not give any reason for the reader to like get confused, lose focus, etc. And I think that yes, I think Roman can probably comment on this better than anyone else, but I feel like the loving physiology and pharmacology is a very cliche line in general for anesthesia, right? I think I'm I don't think I'm saying anything wrong there.
Yeah, I agree. I think a big thing about this whole introductory paragraph in general, it's a bit like overall it's a bit bulky. I think it can be split up into two distinct portions here. One kind of obviously whoever the writer is here has a phenomenal story. I mean, if anybody who's from, out of the United States has definitely a lot of things to talk about. So I think the idea behind this paragraph is good. I think it just needs to be rewritten or restructured a little bit. Whereas kind of the first portion of this talks about your perhaps introduction to developing certain characteristics about yourself that would make you suitable for anesthesia, mentioning things like discipline, commitment, planning, understanding deep commitment to physiology and things like that. When I hear those things, I think, well, why not be a cardiologist, right? Every field in medicine has those, and so you need to be a little bit more specific and tailored when you're going to use these kind of buzzy words. So when it comes to anesthesiology, you want to tailor it to things that might apply to the field a little bit more. Additionally, I think when I'm reading this, a big thing for me is I'm almost having to make parallels for the writer as to why they're interested in anesthesiology, and that's never a good thing. When you're reading something, especially somebody like like Katerina mentioned, we surgeons who are doing this in their free time between consults, you don't want to have to read something and say, okay, wait, why is this person interested in anesthesia? You want to kind of lay it out for them, right? You want them to read it and go, oh wow, like this makes a lot of sense why they'd be so interested in this field. I can give you my own personal example since it's more fresh off the top of my head. But when I mentioned I used being a pilot as my introduction, and the parallels that are always spoken to ad nauseum in the OR, where people mention all the parallels of anesthesia and piloting, and I use that as my introductory paragraph, and then led as to why that would make me, a good anesthesiologist, or hopefully a good anesthesiologist in the future.
I love that. Yeah, so I think diving deeper into thinking about, why the specialty. I think let's take a look and see if that's developed, right? So let's take a look at. We can give everyone a couple seconds just to kind of read the body here. So we're going to look at paragraphs 2 and 3 now, and I don't know if Roman or Katarina, if one of you guys want to kind of take it from here as far as like, did the person writing this kind of meet that expectation here, or did they do more of the same? What are your thoughts?
I think a lot of the stuff that's mentioned here, at least seems to be mentioned for the purpose of kind of just like, when I read this, I see a lot of buzzwords. For example, when I see the point of care ultrasound trying to say POCUS, we can kind of just say ultrasound, right? It might be a little bit minutia, but in general, when I'm reading a personal statement, I want to feel the passion from the writer themselves. And in this case, it doesn't necessarily come out as passion rather than just mentioning things that they may have enjoyed doing or kind of went through the kind of just went through the flow of doing in general. I think it would be far more beneficial for the writer here to pick one or just one of the things that they've done here and deep a little or dive a little bit deeper into it. Your introductory paragraph is to set the tone as to why anesthesia. You're and kind of like a great attention getter. And then that second is to solidify that why. Mentioning working with ultrasound or placing IVs, learning to get those tiny hand movements or just seeing the different physiology, how people's different body habitus make it difficult or make it easier to place an IV. Getting into a little bit more minutia in that regard tells the reader that you've really thought about these things. I think too, something that I noticed was at a certain point in this paragraph, it's mentioned that I was comfortable placing difficult IVs, and I'd be very careful writing something like that because when you're in the mindset of a fourth year medical student, what may be difficult to you is definitely not difficult to a seasoned anesthesiologist who's writing this. In general, when approaching a personal statement, I would always err on the side of humility, even though I know you want to show that you've worked really hard at something and you've probably gotten proficient maybe at it. Just always remember that the people that you're writing this for have been doing this for decades, and may kind of chuckle at this saying, well, wow, they think they might have difficult IVs down, but they probably don't, right? So just keep that in mind too.
Yeah. And I think a way, I think to capture that, one of the ways that I would encourage the student to rewrite this would be, telling the story of being in the clinic or in the OR or in the simulation lab and actually, seeing the IV placed numerous times and now actually doing it yourself and then that fracture of like how easy it looks for someone to do versus how hard it is for you and how much deeper of an appreciation now you have for these technical skills that you need to develop. And that can go for anesthesia. That can go for procedural fields, right? I mean, I'm humbled every single day when I'm in the OR because I've seen my attendings do a relatively simple procedure all the time. And now it's my turn to do it. And I'm like, whoa, I can't even line the needle up in the right trajectory, let alone actually, go in into the body, right? And so giving people that kind of context. So like that's the whole show don't tell thing that a lot of people will say when they're talking about the personal statement. Like listing things is good because I think a lot of students think listing things is good because they feel like, oh, I'm speaking the language. Like I'm telling you words that you know. So like I'm trying to show you that I understand how the specialty works. But I think actually telling a story of how you did these things is a lot more compelling.
Yeah, and I was quite literally just about to hit on that too. Like, as opposed to listing these things and talking about the numerous instances that you've built the skill to place these quote unquote difficult IVs, like show a story because the personal statement is a story about you. It's not just you're listing all these things and that's meant to be a compliment to the 10 experiences to your CV. It's supposed to tell a story of who you are. And two of the two paragraphs here, I feel like I'm just getting I'm getting unfortunately some wasted word count too, like repeating ultrasounds, repeating these skills that this applicant is learning how to do. It's great and all, but I feel like it's still a lot of telling. Like you're telling me that you have the characteristics of being a helpful team member and a proficient provider. I understand you spend some time in the lab. I mean, sorry, I spent some time in the simulation center learning these skills, but like what more beyond that? I want a little bit more.
Yeah, I would agree in the sense that these two paragraphs probably could have been combined and condensed into one. Uh, the beginning of it perhaps talking about the actual physicality of learning these hands-on skills that are relevant to anesthesia. The latter of it is translating that inspiration to developing a training simulation program for peers to also do the same thing. So now you're going from your experience, your hands-on kind of exposure to it, to now more of a leadership and mission driven type of ending to the paragraph that ties that this whole thing that puts a nice bow on everything, right? So I think and then I think also if you do that correctly, you're able to free up at least maybe 50 to 100 words that now you can use for something else, right? And whatever that is, whether it's adding more to your background, whether it's adding more to the conclusion, whatever you need space for. All right. Speaking of conclusion, let's go to the conclusion. It's usually my favorite part. So kind of talks a little bit forward looking into the anesthesia residency. I think one of the things that stood out to me is, this is a very, very classic thing that a lot of people do is continue developing into a physician patients can trust during the most stressful and physiologically demanding moments of their lives, while also enriching other aspects of my life, right? So like you've spent almost 4 lines on my screen telling me literally nothing unique, nothing about you, nothing about anesthesia. And you lost the plot. You lost the plot. I would have loved to see a conclusion that tied back to the 15-year-old you that was making this massive life decision of traveling across the world and all of the lessons that you learned in the last, I'm assuming at least a decade, right? Since then. And how those apply to anesthesia and how those apply to you being a good resident in the future. That's the conclusion that I was really hoping for. It's not the conclusion that I got though. So I don't know if anyone else has any thoughts. Otherwise, we're going to move on to the next one.
Yeah, I think when we're thinking about what function a conclusion serves, it really like use your final lines to leave the reader with one cohesive impression rather than a list of future goals. Like I get the idea. I see a lot of students are like, my ambition is this. I'm going to be this kind of doctor. That's like such a cliche. I don't know about you guys. Like I feel like every first draft ends that way. Leave us with a powerful message. Go back to your personal statement and think, what are my themes? What is my thesis? Reintroduce that. Talk about how you have changed. How, the person who you were at the beginning of the story would look at you now. Leave us with something interesting. The same way we want you to open with a hook, close with a hook. Wrap things up.
Yeah. And make me want to meet you, right? I want to leave with that taste in my mouth of like, wow, this is probably a really interesting person that I'd love to talk to. That's the way that you want to finish off. All right, out of the interest of time, we're going to just keep going. We'll go into the next one, which is a surgical statement for reconstructive surgery. So kind of do the same thing. So, I mean, I know, Katarina, we have a surgical resident on the call, so we'll kind of have you kind of do a deep dive to start on the intro. So what do you think about this intro as everyone's reading it?
Yeah, I'll give it like a few seconds because I know it's a lot of text to digest. But when I first read this intro, and I know we had a chance to prepare a little bit before we hopped on tonight, I thought it was a really good intro. Like, it's not something that's specifically medicine related. It's something that ties into their background, wanting to become an architect, talking about design. And the part saying design would play a central role in my future, like that's something that I'm attracted to, and I want to be able to see this kind of permeate through the rest of through their personal statement. Like I'm interested. And honestly, I think that makes for a really good hook. It's not just the first sentence, it's the entire paragraph that supports it.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that this what this student did differently than the previous one is that they didn't even tell me about the specialty. They didn't. This is not an example of frame shifting, right? So here, really, all they did was they alluded to like how it's going to be helpful in their career, maybe, but they did not go down the whole rabbit hole of like going back into the present moment, right? Which I think was really good. And I agree. This makes me want to keep reading. So if we keep reading, like let's say this was like a solid 8 to 9 out of 10 intro. We're in there. We're going down into paragraph 2 body, right? We're
Just a
thinking of
super quick note. Sorry to cut you off, Dan. If you could scroll for one sec,
sure.
just feedback for everyone. Do not use M dashes. You see the long dash in the middle of that second sentence? I don't know if you're using AI, but if you have that in your personal statement, it screams that you use ChatGPT to write this. Like there is no bigger giveaway that you are using ChatGPT to write your personal statement than M dashes. If you have these in your personal statement, I'm not reading them. Like I get a lot of personal statements that have these, and I'm like, oh, this is written so well. And I see the M dash, I'm like, this is all fucking ChatGPT. This person didn't even try. So
Yeah.
quick aside, sorry.
Agreed. And by the way, we actually ran all of these through an AI detector, which programs not all do, but many do. All of these were well under 50% AI flag, which is like well below what I would say is like a reasonable cutoff. But just keep in mind that AI is a tool that can be used for grammar or brainstorming, but like everyone on this panel has seen plenty of AI slop in their statements from both student side and on the program side too. And we don't like it doesn't sit well with anyone. So like you can use a tool that's there to help, but use it in a way that is actually it's intended and not to do your work for you. All right, let's go to the body. Any thoughts here?
I think just at first glance, it's a really big paragraph. Like this is already feeling overwhelming, and I haven't even started reading the first sentence yet of the second paragraph. I
Yeah.
definitely feel like reading through it, there are definitely places that it could break. Like when they start going towards in during my training, talking about experiences with the wound plastic surgeon, that stuff going forward could probably be a separate paragraph. I would say just overall as a theme for this entire paragraph though, and I know people are probably still kind of glancing through and trying to skim it. I wish there was more of a clear idea of what the role this person played in these encounters. Like talking about meeting a young student with Kabuki syndrome. Okay, I know what that is, but what if, this is like a really rare syndrome? What if somebody's never seen it? I'm not really seeing how this is played as like a significant encounter other than knowing that this is Kabuki syndrome. In going forward, I understand that there's a relation to wanting to have more plastic surgery experience, but a lot of it is kind of like a fly in the wall kind of situation where you're watching these encounters happen, but what is your role actually during these encounters is something that I'm trying to pull from this, and I'm not really seeing it as much.
Yeah, I think there's a little bit of like losing some of that steam here, right? Where we're kind of like getting into a little bit of the territory that the previous writer did, where they were doing some listing of things, listing of terms and medical jargon, and kind of like just, I guess, trying to verify that they've had the exposure to the specialty that is trying to convince me that this is why you want to do this. But I agree. I think it leaves a little bit to be desired on the front of why you, right? Like sure, it's all interesting. I mean, I think like there's whole like reality TV shows with like 30 seasons of like plastic surgery. Like a lot of people find plastic surgery very interesting, right? So like why are I guess tell me a little bit more about your role in it, or like how you kind of came to terms that this was the best thing for you to actually do. Um, I think that's probably the biggest point of feedback that I think this is missing. Cutting some of that and explaining a little bit more to the reader of the actual student's role. And I think that there's here. This is also we see the conclusion here, so we could talk about the ending of this or the conclusion. I don't know if anyone wants to take a stab at that. Any feedback that kind of comes through there as we kind of wrap up this statement.
I think in general, one of the pieces of advice that I was given when writing my personal statement was try not to get too ahead of yourself as far as subspecialties and things like that. You still have, residency is its own thing and fellowship is something after that. Whether if you're applying to a program that's, a pipeline for pediatric anesthesiology or pediatric facial reconstructive plastic surgery, then maybe mention it. But in general, I would tend to avoid mentioning that, you have a specific calling towards working with younger children or working with the pediatric population. I would in general just mention why the field of reconstructive surgery is the right field for you. And then in your interview, you can maybe mention that you would like to think about pursuing a fellowship later after that. That was something that I noticed with the conclusion here, that it's kind of getting ahead of itself, where right now we're just trying to get into that field of reconstructive surgery and we're not really yet getting to that, distant part of training.
Got it. I agree. I agree. I don't think you have to go into subspecialties. Like the whole point of this is like, let's focus on the now. There's going to be at least multiple years, right? Of like your development as a doctor between now. Like a lot of people are going to like change their minds. They may not be competitive enough for a specific fellowship. Like we on the side of the review committee don't want you to be only going into a field for a specific subspecialty fellowship outcome. That's a very worrisome type of candidate, believe it or not. And I think that can be confusing because you might be like, well, I'm so passionate. I want to do this super niche thing that like maybe a lot of people don't want to do. And so you should choose me for that. But at the same time, don't forget the purpose of residency training is not to become a niche specialist. It's to make you a board certified generalist in that field, right? And some fields are just niche by default, but like, we want someone who's going to be a good resident on all of the services that they rotate at, not just this one subspecialty service that they get 1 month on during their PGY 4 year, right? Like that's not really the type of person that we want in our program when there's someone else who's excited about all of it, right? So think about that as well as you're kind of talking about the subspecialties. All right, out of the interest of time, let's go to our statement number 3. So here's a dermatology personal statement submitted from the panel, from the audience, and we're gonna dive right into it. And Joe, if you want to take it away as far as first impressions on the intro as people are reading.
So I'll give you guys a second to read as I remember what I was thinking here. So I think let's just start kind of first couple sentences of this first paragraph. I think we have a really terrific message here, but it kind of reads like an email. Like you're opening, you kind of get one chance to get the reader hooked. So tell me a story that transports me into your shoes. Make me see the world through your eyes with this glimpse into your memory, and you'll succeed in making us feel exactly the way you did. The credibility you earn from the reader by putting them in your shoes is really going to be what glues them into their seat and gets them to continue reading the essay. So I think we have some really great ideas. I think turning this from kind of telling people this into a narrative where people are seeing things through your eyes is going to be a lot more intriguing. Something I really liked about the previous introduction was kind of pairing something else, like a lifelong journey you've been on, and kind of transitioning from that into the story you're telling about. Now I'm taking that same passion into this direction. I think if you can find a way to tell a story like that, it makes it so much more engaging. Put us in your shoes, help us understand where you're coming from. And I think it'll help the story really just kind of tell itself.
Yeah, and I think the idea of like I think like a daughter, a first degree relative. That's really the word I was looking for. A first degree relative being involved in their care of some kind, and that being a moment that you're going to share is not an unreasonable hook or an unreasonable like source of inspiration. I think that it's something that you are. I think that this person can probably do a better job of being a little bit more emotive in the writing and making me feel what they're feeling. I feel like they're telling me this situation, this specific incident, but they're not giving me enough oomph. You know what I mean? There's not enough oomph of like the worry that a parent has about an infant daughter when anything goes wrong, right? Tell me more about the different things that you tried, right? The different doctors maybe that you went to, maybe how are you a med student, right? What kind of knowledge were you applying uh, from what you learned in school to the situation? How was that conflicting? How are those two roles, you being a medical student or maybe a pre-med, depending on how old you were right when this happened, how are those two roles competing with one another? Of like, all right, I'm a parent and I'm trying to do the best thing, but I also know all this stuff. And I'm not an expert, but I kind of do know a lot of stuff about the body and medicine. Tell me about that. I feel like I feel like that's a little bit missing here. And I think there's quite a bit of fluff at the end of this intro that I would probably cut entirely. Right? I mean, that whole last sentence or two feels pretty superfluous and not really giving me that kind of individual insight that I would really want to see.
Yeah, I feel maybe I'm getting ahead of myself here, but if you guys take a look at the second paragraph, I think something that would really help this statement is actually kind of flipping a lot of the ideas from the second paragraph into the first. I really want to get to know you a little bit. I want to hear about who you are. It'll really help me buy into the story. So if you take a look at the second paragraph, with an engineering background, I thrive on problem solving that integrates multiple streams of data. In Derm, this translates to analyzing visual cue, blah, blah, blah. Like, think about kind of the previous statement, what they did really well, where we take our own unique background and tie it into why that background made us fall in love with the specialty. If you can kind of open up, help me get to know you a little bit, I'm bought in. Now you can start telling me the story about that's very personal to you. On that journey, now I get to know you a little bit. On that journey, start telling me about your daughter. Tell me about the struggle. Tell me what you've been through. Now I'm bought in. Now I'm a lot more open to hearing about this. Now, if we can make that a little more personal, I think we have a really slamming essay.
I totally agree. And I think that kind of blends in. This person is going like total reverse chronological order, right? So now I'm going like from what I have no other evidence but to assume is the present, back to like the engineering, and then back to like prior to med school, which I don't understand. Is this where is that on the timeline, right? Is that while you were an engineer? Or is that before or after? And then going into the internal medicine rotation back to the med school time. It's a lot of back and forth. I'm quite frankly losing you entirely. And I think the best piece of advice for this is like just restructuring all of the ideas. Again, there's some good ideas. There's some things that are just kind of really unnecessary to include and kind of not unique to the individual. But I think restructuring this to be like chronological, like Joe said, keep it make me understand how each of these things build on top of each other and into each other to develop your interest in derm, your interest in and how those things that you learned through that exploration of the specialty to becoming a good resident, right?
Yeah, maybe you're Christopher Nolan. Maybe you can tell a story in pieces that don't go in order. But this is not the place to do it. We have one page. So it's really important to look at your story. And I mean, the writing here is good, but look at your story and see, does the order I'm telling this in make sense? Or is it going to confuse my reader?
I think another thing to just note really quickly, this writer also uses an abbreviation of a CNA in that paragraph prior to medical school. Like, I don't know what a CNA is. I think I would be careful about, and also the last writer had also used like an ORIF. Of course, we know what that is, like surgically, but I'd be careful about using some abbreviations throughout your writing because I may not know what it is. And if I can't build that from your topic sentence and I just don't know what things are, then I'm not going to consider it as impactful as you would think that story to be because that topic sentence is already kind of detracting from it.
Yeah. And I think as we kind of go in towards the end, we're really seeing we go back to the internal medicine rotation here, and then we kind of completely go away from dermatology for like a whole paragraph. And I get what they were trying to do with the understanding the importance of patient education and communication and bridging knowledge gaps. But like, why are we focusing so much space on a very much irrelevant kind of clinical domain to the specialty And that again, I get what you're trying to say, that you're listening, you understand the importance of the patient interview, you understand how that doctor patient relationship is valuable, and it is valuable to dermatology, but you never made that connection. You're making me like decipher that, and that's not good, right? Like that's not good practice, right? um Pick a derm story, right? Go, pick a story from that's related to the specialty, and then tie all those principles in, and talk about how maybe, as a great opportunity here, talk about your relationship with your child's dermatologist. What did that teach you? How much do you trust that person for solving that problem for you, and for being there for you during a time where you were very emotionally, you know, just like jarred by like your child being ill, right? That's so much better than going into this a story about a diabetic, which like everyone sees in there, like everyone here on this call has seen a diabetic on the internal medicine floor who is in like DKA. I would hope. I really, I don't. If you haven't, that's a whole other problem. But like, I'm assuming everyone here has seen that. So this is like very much like not a good use of space. And I think there's a similar thing to be said about the conclusion here, right? I think we're seeing a lot of very generic terms being thrown around. We're getting almost the only thing here about derm is like the self confidence thing, which I know is relevant, but like a lot of this paragraph can be interchangeable for literally any other specialty. And that means that you're missing an opportunity. You're missing a very big opportunity to talk more about you, the specialty, what you learned from exploring this field. Actually, still, by the way, like we're at the end of it, and I still don't even know, like, was that one time that you know what I mean? Was the one time with your daughter being ill, was that all it took to be like set on this field, this super niche field that is like you to get zero exposure to in like medical school, basically, besides like maybe a week of courses? Like, tell me, I feel like I'm missing a lot. I'm not convinced, honestly. I'm not convinced that you've thought this through in a meaningful way, the way I know that other applicants definitely are, right?
Think something to really think about when you have this on paper in front of you and you're thinking, did I write an effective essay? Whatever discipline you're applying towards, I think your mentality needs to be, if I cut this, will it bleed dermatology? If I cut this, will it bleed surgery? Right? Think about what you are spending a disproportionate amount of your time talking about. Exactly what Dan mentioned, like this doesn't bleed dermatology. Like I can tell you're interested, but I'm not really understanding why. That whole paragraph about A1C, that's fat. Trim the fat. Get rid of
Yeah.
it. Look at that opening paragraph. There's so much to pick through there. They just casually dropped that one of their closest friends died of melanoma. They're talking about the struggle with their daughter. Like I'm not getting any of that. And then when we get to the conclusion, there's a line that kind of stayed with me. The second sentence: through my personal experiences with dermatologic issues, experiences of family and friends, patients I encountered. Like, where is that? It's not in the essay, right? If you
Right.
talked about the things you name drop kind of in the conclusion, you'd have an incredible personal statement. You clearly have been through enough to write a statement all about derm and why it's fascinating to you. Make me see it, right? And then that's exactly your goal. If you can make me see why you should be a dermatologist, you've won. Mission accomplished. You won the personal statement.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And I
I
think,
totally agree.
yeah, just one thing that I wanted to just point out with regards to this conclusion, that last sentence, just a sentence saying, I hope to build on these strengths as I grow into a thoughtful, skilled dermatologist. Great. Remembered for empathy, excellence, and patient-centered care. I don't know if I necessarily would want to see a co-resident of mine who wants to focus on their legacy as they're trying to become a board certified dermatologist. I think this is kind of getting at it's not something that I'm trying to like focus on, but it leaves a little bit of a sour taste in my mouth if I haven't really seen all of these things come across during your personal statement, and yet this is something that you want to establish as your legacy going forward. I don't know if any of the other panelists have any thoughts about that, but that was just something that I wanted to just point out.
Yeah, I think it's not, again, these are not bad things to want to be, but I agree, like, you haven't demonstrated them as relevant to you. Like, you haven't convinced me that you are going to be these things. So it almost like it opens more questions than it does provide the answers, right? All right, out of the interest of time, this was jam packed, and I want to be respectful of our panelists. So we are gonna put a pin in it here for today. But for anyone out there that didn't get chosen today, we are happy to work with you. There's a discount code here for all of the attendees to use if you want your personal statement and application get edited by someone in your future specialty. We will have a quick Q&A for a couple of minutes, but you guys can also scan this QR code to chat with us for free and to learn more about what working with us would look like. And you also should all have the code in your emails as well. So be sure to check your email, or sometimes it goes to like the promo tab. Just make sure that you have that, bookmark it. And I know we have some spots left now. They sell it every single year. So definitely, if you're interested in getting this kind of support and feedback on your application, I know this is something missing from my time when I was in your shoes. This is like the time to do it. But yeah, happy to chat with the panelists over some like live Q&A. If anybody has any specific questions, definitely feel free to put them in the chat, and we can do a quick little discussion as well. But yeah, I want to thank the panelists. I thought this was awesome. And for those of you that were chosen for the event, we will send you these to you. So you guys will get a little gift from us sometime over the next day or two of all these comments and feedback points. So yeah, does anybody have any questions you guys want to ask? Or we also think we covered a lot though.
Yeah, it was pretty dense. I guess while we wait for questions to roll in, I know Dan was talking about the actual service that MatchPal offers. I can tell you firsthand, when I was a fourth year med student applying derm, I felt very lost. I didn't have any, as a DO, there weren't really many alumni from my school that had successfully matched. And just having someone I could turn to as a mentor was huge. I think it's a huge reason I successfully matched. Having someone to bounce ideas off of, turn to for advice, ask, am I doing this right, wrong? Look over my personal statement, ERAS, things like that. I think having a fully polished, finalized ERAS application is the key to success if you're applying. I mean, whether it's dermatology, IM, surgery, anesthesia, whatever your track is, having someone who's been through it to hold your hand through the journey is an unbelievable asset.
Yeah. Yeah. And we have people in every single specialty, which is I think the beauty of having a team like ours. There's people in every general specialty, subspecialty you could think of. So there's always someone available for no matter what you're applying for. Yeah, I think we'll kind of, out of the interest of time, we'll kind of probably put a pin in it here. Thanks everyone for joining, and reach out to us if you have any questions or want to work with the team. And thanks for the panelists for your time again.